Thanks so much. So thanks again, Georgia, and thank you to our panelists for assembling for this wonderful session. It's my pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the warm welcome. I'm going to get us started right off the bat with a question for our panelists. And so each panelist will answer this one, though there are some questions individually geared to each panelist. So for our first question, I just want to have our panelists tell us a little bit more about themselves and about what really got them started on this journey and brought them to this place in their work. So just to kick us off, I'm going to turn to Sydney, and then we'll kind of circle through.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me again. And Jennifer, I need some tips for you on how to write a bio because that was amazing. And I always struggle to write a bio. So clearly, I need some career coaching from you. But to kick it off, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, but hopefully, we'll get into a little bit more of the details when we're chatting today. Like my bio mentioned, I'm the head of social impact at Shopify, but I'm pretty new to that role. I've been there for about a year and a half, and I spent my time, like I said before, at YWCA and at other nonprofits working with youth, working on gender issues, and that was always kind of my passion. So, what do I do now, and how did I end up here? Well, I actually started when I was studying. I studied international development at McGill. I'm also a Montrealer. And then I worked in corporate social responsibility for a clothing company. So I worked in CSR. I was investigating factories that were creating the clothes that we wear and trying to understand what the conditions were like, how things are made, things like that. And this was over 10 years ago now. So a little bit different, a little less transparency, although supply chains are still pretty opaque to this day. And doing that work made me realize two things. One, the company I was working for is probably not going to make much of a difference when it came to labor conditions globally. And two, it really showed me the gendered aspects of labor in the global supply chain. So understanding the impact that women experience in the workplace, especially in this kind of global picture of how we get things. And there were lots of other elements related to language and religion, ethnicity on this global scale. So it got me super interested in that world. And I ended up going back to school and studying global affairs at the University of Toronto. Then I started a job as a translator at YWCA. So I had just moved to Toronto. I didn't know anybody. I really needed something a little bit more fulfilling in my life. And so I decided to take a 1 month contract at YWCA Canada and do some translation work. And then I ended up working there for 4.5 years. My last role was as the director of programs and projects. So really what that lesson taught me is that it was important to kind of take risks and do things that might not be the traditional path, but you kind of end up in a place that you love, but also that it's good to kind of have that well-rounded experience. So I was looking for, school is great, and I'm sure you can probably relate doing your PhD. You kind of need something outside of school, or else you might not do well in that environment, at least for me. So that was really helpful. And I learned so much from that experience. I take my learnings from YWCA everywhere. I worked in a tech nonprofit afterwards, and then that's how I ended up at Shopify. Now I get to take a lot of what I do or what I learned in the nonprofit sector and try and be a good partner to the nonprofits that I work with at Shopify. And a lot of my work is focused on empowering underrepresented communities globally when it comes to tech and entrepreneurship. And my focus is on Black and Indigenous youth, which I really love, and girls, young women, and gender diverse youth. So that's kind of what my day job is. And in my free time, I also volunteer quite a bit with organizations that do work in the gender space, youth education and empowerment, and international cooperation work as well.
Thank you so much, Sydney. That was perfectly timed at 3 minutes. So kudos to you. And definitely with the PhD, I found you need to take breaks because otherwise it really is a slog. So that was really well noted. Yasmina, I'll turn over the mic to you so that you can go ahead and let us know how you got to this place in your work.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to share this space with other very inspiring women. My name is Yasmina. I'm from Morocco. So I was born and raised in Morocco, but I also raised in Dubai. And I've lived in 7 different countries so far. I'm based in Puerto Rico now. And being born and raised in Morocco, having a single mother, really, I say that I did not become a feminist, but I was born into one because of the conditions in which I was brought into life, and seeing how universally there are still a lot of legislations and laws that are sexist and archaic. So that really ignited my desire to change things and be a feminist. And I first studied political science and international relations, and then I studied international law. And when I was doing my master's degree, this is when I decided to launch Politics for Her, which is the organization that I lead. And we advocate for the inclusive and meaningful participation of young women and girls in politics and leadership. And we focus on young women and girls of color, gender diverse people. We have an intersectional lens, of course. And so when I studied political science, I realized how male-dominated the field was, and I wanted to change this distorted vision. Because when we think about politics, we think about corruption, evilness, greed. And I thought that by having more women involved, within an intersectional lens, of course, we will be able to bring meaningful change, a more sustainable, a more equal, and a more peaceful world. And then the pandemic hit, so I decided to do a second master's degree in forced migration and refugee protection. And I'm focusing on gender-based violence against women from Central America, because I've done a lot of experience in this setting when I was in Costa Rica. Then I worked in the humanitarian field, I worked for the UN, and I realized it was not for me. For many different reasons. There was so much bureaucracy, there's a very neo-colonial, patriarchal structure and system to it, and I felt very powerless as a young woman of color, like facing this very elitist and exclusive kind of system. It was just not meant for me. So then I shifted towards becoming a consultant only for feminist organizations. And right now, I'm also consulting for World YWCA, which I absolutely love the experience. And I consult for feminist organizations, and I coach young women and girls in 2 different key areas: personal development, early career, and I lead Politics for Her. And it's very fulfilling and exciting, but there are a lot of challenges, which I'm sure we'll cover next.
Thank you so much, Yasmina. Honestly, that sounds like an incredible amount of work to juggle. So kudos to you for all that you're doing and have done so far in this area. I also want to draw attention for our audience members to Georgia's comment in the chat that if you have any questions for our panelists as you're listening to them speak, there is a Q&A function that you can use. It should be located just at the bottom of the screen. For me, it's next to participants. And so you can feel free to type your questions and we'll have an opportunity at the end to address them. So please feel free to, if they come to you as panelists are speaking, just to type them down and we'll get to them later on. Without further ado, I do want to move to Jennifer so that we can hear a little bit more about how she got to this place in her work. Her bio, of course, gave us a glimpse, but I'm looking forward to hearing sort of this fuller answer. So Jennifer, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thanks, Aisha. And thank you to everyone. I look forward to connecting after. This is very powerful to hear. So I feel very grateful and honored to be here. Yeah, so I brought myself back to my first job to answer this question. And I had an opportunity to work as a youth coordinator at a local community center. And in that time, I had a chance to work with the youth and the city to build a skateboarding park. And myself being a youth, that's not something that I was necessarily interested in at the time. But when I'm thinking about it, I really had an opportunity to hear from the youth their passions and what they wanted from the city and what would give them some joy in their own community and to take ownership on that. So it was at that time that I really knew I had a desire to work with people in any form or capacity. After this, as you heard in my bio, I did just being a youth and still had a desire of adventure and travel. I moved to Australia, and that's where I became a dive master. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. A kayak guide, and of course, this led me to have an opportunity to travel different parts of the world and experience a lot of different challenges, positive things as well. And from then, when I came back, I became a mother. And unfortunately, due to family circumstances changing, I became a single mom. And it was at that time I decided to go back to school. And I became a career counselor, which I've been doing for 15 years. And I completed a career practitioner diploma through Douglas College. And so in that time, for the last 15 years, I've worked with youth at risk, single moms, newcomers to Canada, people with disabilities. And I have a passion to hear where someone's been, where they are now, and where they want to go. And so thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That really resonates just because my own single mother also took her sort of second career in employment counseling. It is completely a surprise to me that I too have ended up in that role, but she laughs at me now. So I really appreciated your story and appreciated hearing that journey that you took. So with last but certainly not least, Zane, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us how you got to this place in your work.
Thanks so much. And yeah, just to echo what some of the folks on the panel already said, really in awe with some of these bios and introductions. So my name is Zane Hindawi, and I am a manager on the youth engagement team. So a lot of advocacy work at Plan International Canada. And it's funny listening to some of these introductions. I relate in a lot of different ways. So I too, Yasmina, was actually born in the Emirates. I wasn't born in Dubai, and not Dubai, Dubai wasn't Dubai now. I'm sure Yasmina was the same for you. It was literally sand. I actually grew up in a city nearby called Sharjah. But I always did have this deep love for like working with young people. And Jennifer, similar to you, I sat and I was like, where did this journey begin? I used to volunteer at like local kindergartens, and the first part-time job that I wanted so deeply with my soul at my local mall was Build-A-Bear. And when I look back now and I'm like, like this interest and passion for wanting to work with young people, I think stemmed from, again, Jennifer, a little similar to you, of wanting to learn about some kind of a journey that they were a part of and feeling a sense of like incredible fulfillment, even if I was just a little speckle of that journey. So in a kindergarten setting, like, going to the kindergarten on day 1 and a young person not knowing their ABCs, and by day 10, learning about their ABCs, and just knowing that I'm a little part of that growth was really lovely. And paired with that, I will say, I moved to Canada at age 10. And when I think back to like my early years in the education system in Canada, I loved it, but I would say that the gap was, I found a hard time relating to like the books we read and the movies we saw and the stories. And I came from an international school where I was learning English and Arabic, and it's an Islamic country, so I was learning about the Islamic religion, and it was a big shift. And I think that shift really halted my assimilation to Canadian culture, of like, I don't really see a lot of people like me or people like my aunts and my uncles and stories that I remember. So I think that that was kind of the drive for me to want to go the education route of like, I'm going to have my own classroom and I'm going to have one that is full of stories and diversity and culture. And I just didn't want anyone to kind of experience that gap that I did with my move here. And my experience in the classroom took me to a lot of different countries. To, you know, I'm originally Jordanian, so I went back to Jordan and I taught there, and Kenya, and, you know, in my old role I taught in the US for a while. So I think learning to work with young people and learning about their interest to want to not only learn, but learn about how they want to take action in the world was kind of that drive for me to say, I love education and I love working with young people, but what else can I do with this degree? And I know that we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that was kind of like the initial spark, I would say, of how I got here, is this love for education and working with young people. And that's what led me into advocacy work.
Thank you, Zane, and thank you so much to all our panelists for starting us off on such a great note. I really just appreciate hearing about sort of the common threads as I was listening. All of you seem moved by a desire to increase autonomy, not only for yourselves, but also for others around you, and then to fill gaps that really aren't and haven't been filled in the ways that we need, because we always need more people working in those roles to advocate and to move us forward. So I'm really appreciating just hearing the differences in each of your journeys, but also some of the very similar threads that we can kind of weave together over the course of this hour. So I'm going to move on to our individual questions. And so I'm going to start again with Sydney. You'll have roughly 3 minutes to answer. I'll be timing, but so don't worry about keeping yourself to time. But Sydney, the question for you is, you have vast experience with many different organizations and networks in both the nonprofit and private sector. How has your past work in the nonprofit sector influenced your work in the private sector at Shopify? What would you say are the main differences between these sectors? And why is it important for you to remain a part of different committees and networks within the nonprofit sector?
Great question. I actually loved seeing this question because I think this is something that I think needs to change a lot in, at least in Canadian work culture, but probably even more broadly in Western work culture, is kind of like the overvaluing of the private sector and the undervaluing of the nonprofit sector. And I don't really think that is true. I think that there's so much skill that I gained from working in nonprofit for over 5 years that I really do use every single day in my work in the private sector, and specifically in tech, which is like a high innovation, fast paced environment. To speak of some of the differences, those things are definitely things that required adjustment. But there's a lot of transferable skills regardless of what industry you're in. I also think that the way that work is now is changing quite a bit. The environment at a tech company is different than what I think people expect. And that rigidity of the private sector is changing quite a bit. So I'll just preface it with that. And then I'll say I'm the head of social impact at Shopify. So I work with nonprofit partners every single day. I work with young people every day, and I work with volunteers who are engaged in the different programs that we run every day. So I think the biggest value of having worked in nonprofit for so long is I think I'm a good partner to our nonprofits as a funder now, or as somebody who's more on the corporate partnership side. I can understand, like, okay, this is going to be, for example, way too much reporting for the amount of money that we're giving to this organization. Or they may need some flexibility around this time of year because it's the fiscal year end for a lot of nonprofits. So I think having that understanding of essentially my client at this point is really helpful. It helps me to, I think, be a good partner, be a good communicator when I'm working with organizations all over the world. So that, I think, is one thing. The second part is the relationship building. Being in my role, I really have to work with stakeholders in so many different places. We'll have people from the C-suite who are volunteering in a program, and we'll have people who are managers who are volunteering. We'll have people who are interns who are volunteering, and being able to meet all those people where they are and support them in the way that's best for them, but also best for the communities that we're serving is really important, especially because we're working with underrepresented youth. So we always want to add value. We never want it to be performative or something that's actually extracting energy and resources from the communities that we're working with. So I think that's what makes me a good funder, is my experience having worked in nonprofit for so long and building that empathy in a way that I don't think you can get honestly ever in the private sector. So that's really valuable. The differences in terms of the like working in nonprofit versus working in private, especially tech, I won't speak for everything, is the pace of things is very different. In the tech sector, you work extremely quickly, you pivot very fast, things are changing incredibly quickly, especially right now with just the increase of artificial intelligence, specifically in my sector, which is e-commerce. That is something I've never really experienced. I think there's pros and cons to that. One is that there's a lot of space for experimentation and innovation, and you can try things really quickly, and if they fail, you can just be like, well, at least we didn't spend a year on it. Whereas I find in nonprofit, especially in Canada, where nonprofits are so reliant on government funding, there is a lot of difficulty in just being able to innovate quickly, meet people's needs quickly, change with the times quickly. So that's something that, you know, it has been a positive change for me and a change in the way of working. I think that one of the differences that's been more of a challenge for me is the perspective. Working in a tech company that's specifically e-commerce and entrepreneurship focused is very market driven. I have an economics background, but it's not something I was used to working in, that kind of market driven perspective on things. So it's been an adjustment, but also kind of cool because it's like tapping on those parts of my brain that I didn't use for so long, basically since I did my undergrad. So that's kind of been that piece. And I think the final part of the question, what really resonates with me in terms of like, how do we bring this all together, is that if there's anything I've learned from this journey, it's your career is so much more than your job or your job title. Your job is really just one part of your career and who you are as a person. So I think that what's been helpful for me to kind of balance and continue to be part of those communities and networks that I care about is think of them as part of my career and not as just something extra that I'm doing. So I mentioned I'm on a number of boards, but also I'm a researcher. I research social policy at the University of Toronto. I recently co-authored a book chapter that was published in October. I actually have almost like a whole other job and identity outside of technically what pays me day to day. And I think that that's super important to just your own personal professional development, especially if you're working in the private sector. Like we see layoffs happening all the time. So really connecting yourself too much to that job can sometimes make it really hard when those things happen, both for getting a new career path, but also your own personal sense of self and identity. But it also just makes you a more well-rounded person. I think the days of like, this is your one job that you do for your whole life in the same career in the same company are totally gone. It's much more fulfilling to have a more well-rounded career that allows you to be engaged in your community and remind you why you even do these things every day. So I think that's what's been most important for me and what I've learned from kind of balancing the different sectors in my day-to-day.
Thank you so much, Sydney, for that response. You had quite a long question and you managed to, I think, hit every note. And I think once again, you're really pointing to the importance of having your hands in a few different baskets or fingers in a couple different pies, right? And I think that that's really crucial for so many people, particularly in this changing landscape. So in that case, I'm going to ask Yasmina, your successes are inspiring for all leaders in our field. As the founder of your organization, Politics for Her, what was your experience like in the process of founding the organization? And do you have any advice for the audience about founding their own organizations if they wish to do so? And as I promised in the chat, I'm going to be popping that question there so that people can read it as well as hear me say it. Yes, when you're ready.
Thank you so much for the question. So I would say that the experience of launching Politics for Her was both extremely inspiring, but also terrifying. I did not know what I was doing. I literally learned everything through YouTube and Google and how to make a website, how to use social media for positive change. And simultaneously, I was also gaining experience every summer as an intern, whether with the United Nations agencies or whether with human rights institutions, to learn more and more, especially on the communications aspect. So I dealt with self-doubt, with imposter syndrome. Is anyone going to like it? Is anyone going to read it? Because it started as a blog when I launched it. And I questioned myself for so many weeks, so many months before officially launching it. At some points, I was like, that's it. It needs to happen now. And then I was so pleasantly surprised when so many young women were reaching out to me from all over the world saying, I love everything you're covering. I've always wanted to do something similar, but never took the first step towards it. So, it's something very common when it comes to young women, and particularly young women of color, the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome, questioning yourself. But then eventually you realize it's not that bad, and there's a lot that are in similar positions. And fast forward, I launched Politics for in 2017, and I was alone. And now we're over 100 volunteers. We have 6 different regional hubs in different languages: Arabic, French, Spanish, Portuguese, to be as inclusive, as diverse as possible. And I'm still learning, of course, because it's a never-ending journey. And I would just say, don't overthink, just do it. Don't think about the results, but think about the actions and think about how you can learn. And it's never a failure, but it's always a lesson. And this is just part of the process. So you're always going to be navigating and learning as you go, as you face challenges. And it's the most rewarding experience at the end of the day, because you have a community of young people or not that share your values, that share the same vision for a future where young women and girls are free from violence, are able to get to leadership positions and all their diversity. So I would say that just do it and don't overthink it, and you will learn with time. And we have countless resources for free online. And I always tell that to my team members. I'm like, girls, if you don't know something, if you don't know how to do it, what are you gonna do? You're gonna look how to do it, and you're gonna learn like that. Google University, YouTube, TikTok, I don't know. Figure it out. You got this. You can do it. If I was able to make politics what it is today, you're capable to do the exact same or even better. So I always tell others, they're like, oh, I want to be like you. I'm like, I want you to be better than me, because you can learn from my mistakes. And I would just say use digital technologies as well, because as much as we face many challenges and as much as there's still a huge digital divide, I believe that digital technologies can be used for positive change. And that's how Politics for Us started. And now it's a nonprofit with over 100 volunteers and impacting thousands of young people.
Thank you so much, Yasmina. That is such an inspiring and important message. I think a lot of us get hung up on results and the end goal, and we forget about the value and importance of the process. So that's always a good reminder that I have to say to myself as I'm working through all the various things in my life, including the PhD, where the process is a huge part and the end result is always feeling very far away. So Zane, our next question is for you. And once again, I'm going to pop it into the chat. So Zane, you do a lot of work around education and youth engagement with roles with renowned organizations. This work must require a lot of networking and relationship building. Would you say this is an essential part of your work? And what would your advice be for building relationships to aid in your ambitions?
I think that is a great question. And I will say that I owe a lot of my growth to relationship building and networking. Um, and I think that when it comes to that topic, I would bucket it in three buckets. The first, and in relation to like working with young people, is I found a lot of success with just creating an environment that is full of trust and open communication. And it's so much easier said than done. But how I find that I've done it, and again, I'm definitely not an expert in this, but the tips that I have is creating a space that just allows a young person to share their concerns and their ideas, and welcoming a space of mistakes. It's okay to make a mistake, and that's how you grow. If you don't make a mistake, you won't know that that was something that you need to do different next time. And creating that brave and safe space is not easy. And I thought about like how do you create that space? And I will say the second bucket of that is authenticity. That has been like a toughie for me, like coming from, you know, the classroom setting. I think I was very like, you know, robot teacher Zane. And then I worked in the corporate field for a while, and I was robot corporate Zane. And I think I found that like when you are authentically yourself, like, you know, and authentic sees authentic, and it also creates like a vulnerable and safe space of like, wow, Zane's being pretty open and, you know, sharing these things about her that maybe I can too. And then I'll say that, you know, the last bucket of that, of how I do it is, and maybe it is because I come to conversations and experiences as a, you know, Middle Eastern, Muslim, you know, Jordanian, Palestinian woman. So social and cultural awareness is a big one for me. And I know that that also is tricky, of how are you being sure that you are bringing diverse perspectives to conversations and resources and stories and pictures. Like, that's hard to do. But I think it builds tolerance and empathy, and it, you know, in turns allow you to better get to know someone. And I will say that those three buckets, like, I'm relating them to working with young people. But for a while, I did work on the major gifts team at one of the old nonprofits that I worked in. So I related a lot to some of the things Sydney said, of like, you know, first and foremost, again, creating an open communication where you're sharing good news stories, you know, with your potential prospect or donor. But then on the next level is that authentic, you know, conversation of getting to know the prospect or donor. Sydney said meeting people where they are. That's a great one, of like, what are you interested in? What level of, you know, donation are you in right now? And then I think that last component of bringing social and cultural awareness was successful within my role now with youth advocacy, but also with donor engagement. Like, when I learned about a person's interest to fundraise for a specific cause, I knew maybe the project should focus on XYZ. And similarly with young people, when I learn about their interests and their passion, not only can I better help them, but in relation to this topic, I've been able to better introduce them to organizations, introduce them to other youth. You know, we've had a really relevant story of a young person I met volunteering. I started volunteering for an organization that supported newcomers in Canada, because when, you know, we had an influx of Syrian refugees come, I was like, I speak Arabic, like I need to use this and, you know, do good use with it. So I volunteered for this great organization, and I met this young person that was using art to share stories of life in, you know, camps when she was forced to leave Syria. And I've introduced, in every journey that I've professionally been on, I've brought her with me, and I've, you know, tried to find moments for her to shine, and I've tried to find moments, you know, to introduce her. And she recently went to the Global Refugee Forum in Geneva, and it was just like a really beautiful full circle moment of the power of relationship building and networking. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Zane. I think that that is such a beautiful story you concluded with, and it really speaks to the power of relationships. And for myself as an introvert, I feel like I'm always loving to hear the answers to these questions because it doesn't necessarily come naturally, but it is a skill and a muscle that you can build. And if you see that there are other people who aren't necessarily as strong in relationship building, you can bring them along with you. And I think that that's really an important takeaway, that we can learn how to build relationships communally and use, or, you know, work with our communities to really strengthen those relationships. So thank you so much for that insight. Now, Jennifer, I'm going to ask you a question about career, the kind of work you do. You give career advice to folks and youth for a living. What would be the main advice of do's and don'ts you would give to this room full of young leaders and entrepreneurs in their leadership and career journey?
Thank you, Aisha. May I share my screen for this one?
Go for it.
Thanks. Can everyone see this? I'm just going to do a slideshow here from beginning. So I want to does everyone see that you could see this, panelists? Okay. I want to have 3 takeaways is what I've come up with. And so the first one, when I'm here, you see me being silly with the red nose. And when I say about be unique, what comes to mind is you're your best asset. So when employers are, you want to own into your uniqueness is what I'm saying. And this is what employers are looking for. So a lot of times we hear, why do you think you'd be the best candidate for this job? And a lot of times we freeze. And really what employers are wanting to hear is not necessarily you being able to tick off every single thing that's on that job description. And in addition, they're not necessarily hearing what you're saying. They're hearing how you're saying it. There's a big difference. And so it's about the attitude. So out of my experience, when I talk to successful candidates, they're that are getting the jobs, they're going in believing in themselves, taking ownership of their uniqueness, and are not afraid to learn from others. So that's the number 1 takeaway. The second one, be confident. So this is my son. I love teaching youth how to wakeboard in my spare time in the summer. As humans, we are definitely programmed, I believe, automatically to have self-doubt. And I believe someone was talking about that earlier. And I think we might, with that self-talk, we think we're not ready for the job. Again, try and focus on what you can offer and always work on your pride. What I mean by pride, and I have a quick example of this, pride's very important not to cross over with ego. And I remember one time working at Rocky Mountaineer Rail Tours, a train company that went from Vancouver to Banff, Jasper, Lake Louise. And I was in the sales department in a call center. And my very first day, I said to the manager, I want to work right beside the person that has the highest sales, because I didn't want my ego to get the better of me. And even though her sales were double mine. So to this day, we're still friends. So that's what comes to mind on be confident. And lastly, work hard. This is a fire truck food truck at one time I was able to convert into, and I'll talk about that later. Showing initiative, having a positive attitude, and willing to try new things, along with being a great team player, will always put you at the top of an employer's mind. So thank you. Those are the 3 takeaways.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I think those are all fantastic takeaways and great things for everyone to put in practice. So I'm going to ask our last couple questions. I want to make sure we have time for question and answer. So I'll ask if you can give us just your first quick thoughts on each of the questions. And so the first question I have is, so far in your career journey, what were some of the challenges, trials, and tribulations that you faced? And what is the proudest moment in your careers to date? And I'm sure it will be hard for you to pick just one, but if you can just try and give us a quick highlight. And I'll start with Zane. Sorry, I forgot that was my job. Go ahead,
That's okay.
Zane.
That's okay. Okay, I'll try to keep it short and sweet. I'll say, without sounding repetitive, I think I definitely did experience imposter syndrome, which I know we talked about a lot in this conversation. And it's funny, I do hear it a lot when I work with young advocates or in conferences or spaces like that. Um, I was so keen to just like grow when I started working within the space of advocacy. I just like loved it and I was so happy and I was such a yes person. And I did find myself growing at a pretty rapid pace. And I remember, you know, in my early 20s being given associate director and they were like, here's a team and here's a budget and, you know, and here's the CEO that you're going to meet with. And I was like, what? They definitely did not think this through. You know, like I definitely was second guessing their decision. And I'll say that it relates to the second part of the question. And I really like, Jennifer, I loved your slides. And I love the first one of like, be unique. And I think that I learned that, you know what, I'm probably not going to be the smartest person in the room. I'm probably not going to be the best to look at budgets. I'm probably going to miss things sometimes. I think I'm good now. I hope I'm good now. But I was put there for a reason and to add to what Jennifer said, for what makes me unique. Whatever it is, you know, they saw it and for some reason it supported the young people that I was working with in some capacity. So I've learned to take pride in the things that make me who I am. And I'll say just really quickly to wrap so I don't take up too much time, the other component of pride that I feel in my role and the biggest advice that I would give is really, and it's so cliche, but do what you love. And especially given the state of the world, like I love having dialogue with great youth advocates, even listening to you, Yasmina, like speak to what you've done of like, just how wonderful it is to know that we do have future generations of young people that like their bread and butter, like their core is to do good in some capacity. Like it feels really good. And I take a lot of pride to just know the youth, just to know them and just to have dialogue with them and just to know that I'm a teeny tiny part of their journey is really what makes me full of pride.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zane. I'm going to move directly to Yasmina, and you can go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you so much for the kind words and for everything that you're doing. I can also feel the passion. I would say that the most important is to not have as a dream a job or a company or an institution, because that was my case. I've dreamt of working for the UN since I was perhaps 15. And I worked so hard, even as so far as going to study at the University for Peace in Costa Rica, created by the UN, to get to the UN. And I eventually did. And my heart was shattered and I was so broken because what I thought was my dream ended up not being my dream, because I was too naive and I had too many expectations of, oh, people working for the UN, for sure, they're all amazing and they care about the planet and, you know. But in reality, no, I discovered that the UN is kind of like politics. It's the same. That's people are more, not everybody, of course, there's still great people working there, but people are more attracted towards prestige and title and money. And so I think that the most important is to stick to your values, stick to your vision, to your purpose in life. What are you aiming to achieve? What kind of mark you want to leave on earth? You don't need any prestigious institution to make that happen. There's going to be a lot of challenges. I've faced many challenges from funding, because funding is extremely hard for youth-led and feminist organizations. There's 0.03% that goes to ending violence against women and girls. I would also say, as a very outspoken activist coming from Northern Africa, from Muslim background, I faced a lot of harassment online, offline, at the UN including, and it just comes with it. When you want to break stereotypes and shake the status quo, it comes with it, and you have to expect that, and just be okay with the fact that purpose is not static, it's dynamic. So maybe you're going to want to work for the UN, but then you realize it's not for you, and that's okay. That's just part of the process. So be kind to yourself trust the process, focus on the journey, on what truly makes you happy, connect to your passion, to your values, and stay authentic. And even if it means that you will attract some backlash.
Thank you so much, Yasmina. Powerful advice to stick to your principles, and so much easier said than done, but so important in this work. So I will now move to Jennifer and then Sydney to round us out.
Thank you. Thanks, Yasmina. I was just thinking, I want to change my answer based on when you were saying about values. So very important. So what comes to mind when I saw this question, I've gone through many challenges. And it's the learnings and it was again my attitude when that challenge came forth of my reaction to it. So when I was talking earlier, I had a chance to become a dive master in Australia. And I remember in this course, it was very intimidating because at the time I was the only female in this course. And the last test to pass, you had to exchange all your gear underwater with your dive buddy. And at the time, the group, they thought it would be funny to see and make it very challenging for me to complete this challenge. So as you could imagine, I was really distraught, hurt, upset, so discouraged, and thought, I just want to get on a plane and go back home to Canada. So when I reflect back on that, when there's new challenges that I'm facing, I think at that time, I was much younger in my life, and how I reacted to that has given me the strength when I'm faced with new challenges moving forward. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Sydney.
Love that. This is very inspiring. I think I'm going to switch it around and start with my proudest moment. So I am so fortunate to have had so many proud moments in my career, which has been not super long, but I think that's part of, like you said, doing work that aligns with your values and with your passions, whether it's your paid job that you do every day or the things that you kind of do to fill your heart after your 9 to 5. So no, I don't think I could name like any moment or we'd be here for hours. But a big one, I think, for folks, I think everyone's kind of said it, but it's a lot of the work around seeing the impact of what you do with the communities that you serve. So being able to just see that change in somebody who came in a certain place and you were, like you said, a small part of that journey to where they are now, I think that that makes me extremely proud. I have like a big part of my identity as being a big sister, so I feel like it can kind of be like that, like you feel like, oh, like I was a little part of this, I was part of this journey. So that's something that I'm always very proud of in the work that I get to do. And then in terms of challenges, really similar to what people said, I think my biggest challenge in general in my career to this day is living up to other people's expectations or like the world's expectations of what your career should be versus what I actually want to do with my life, which to be honest is not really working. Like I'd rather be doing fun things like Jennifer was mentioning, like traveling and wakeboarding and stuff like that, if we're fully honest. So I think the way that I've reconciled that desire to have something that's driven from my core is that I try to create goals that are based on what I actually want to do, rather than the expectations that other people have or that society has for what you should accomplish. And I think, especially if you're a woman, those expectations can be very intense in both your personal life and your professional life. Adding on like women of color, queer women, things like that only makes it harder. The second thing is I really set boundaries. I've learned that the hard way is I really set boundaries in order to not be going through the challenges I went through earlier in my career. I still struggle to do that. I'm such a people pleaser, but it's something that I'm working on and I'm continuing to do. And I think I've seen change. And then the final part is, and it sucks because my bio does not live up to this at all, but I try not to do too much. Clearly, I'm not always succeeding at that, but I try to really take that time for myself and be conscious of work-life balance when I'm doing my career. A big part of pivoting into a larger company that has more support for me as a person was part of trying to take on a little bit less and focus on things that are important to me outside of work. So hopefully, it's really hard to give yourself permission to do that. So I really hope everyone listening, especially if you're early in your career, please give yourself permission to do that. You should, it's important. And that's just as much a part of your 9 to 5, is really just taking care of yourself.
Thanks so much, Sydney. That is a really great note to close this question on. And I know sometimes when we look at other people's bios or on the things that they're doing, we feel pressure to do that, but it's so important to honor your own capacity and to recognize that it's not always a limitation, but it can actually be, precisely the way that you need to show up in the world and in the work that you're doing. So our very last question, we have no questions in the Q&A. So our very last question for the panelists was, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self? If people need to drop off, we are nearing 8 p.m. But if everyone is okay to answer this final question before we close, I think that it's a really good one for us to kind of walk out of here with, because I'm sure for everybody who's no longer 20, it's nice to think back to what we might tell ourselves. And so for this question, I'm going to try my best to go sort of in the somewhat reverse order, but to give Sydney a break, start with Jennifer.
Thank you. Yeah, I think telling my 20-year-old self for sure to have more confidence, less self-doubt, owning into my uniqueness that I talked about earlier, and channeling this, not worrying about what other people would think, and not hesitating so much to reach out to others and finding those mentors. And then lastly, I just want to leave by saying you can't be a youth all your life, but you certainly can be youthful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's such a lovely thought. And Sydney.
Yes, I love that. As someone who's aging out of the youth category, I very much appreciate that. But I think what I would tell myself at 20 is don't be so hard on yourself. It's really something that I agonized over when I was thinking when I was 20, I was in university, and I felt like if I made a wrong choice, it would have some type of domino effect on my whole life. And that's just not true. You're allowed to make mistakes. You have plenty of time to learn in your whole life. You'll be continuing to learn. If you ever lose that desire to change, learn, unlearn things, be better, it's actually a problem. So I think that at 20 years old, I would have just said, like, you don't have to have it all figured out. You can make mistakes. You can give yourself the grace to make those mistakes, and that you're never going to stop learning and changing and adapting. So you don't have to do it all right now. I think that I would have been a much less stressed 20-year-old if I had somebody who told me that. And then also on Jennifer's point is to find more sponsors and mentors who could really help me navigate. I think this is really common, I think, for Black women as well, of like wanting to do everything on your own and be resilient and not rely on other people. You're also always told that you're somehow stronger than other people, which is just like maybe the case, but shouldn't be. And so I think that that's a big part of it too, is just finding people you can trust and rely on who can help you reach your goals.
Thank you so much, Sydney. I really appreciate your response, and I'm going to go directly to Yasmina for hers.
Thank you so much. So I would say believe in yourself even when no one does, including that voice inside of your head that tells you that you cannot do it. Your dreams can become your reality because dreams are just a goal with a plan. And if you work really hard on cultivating a positive mindset and aligning with tangible actions, I can promise you that anything that you want and that you set your mind into, you can achieve and you can accomplish, and that no dream is too big. And this has opened so many doors to me. And just always believe in yourself. There's always going to be people that are going to tell you that you're not doing enough, that you're not enough, that you're not good. Always. There's always going to be unhappy people. There's always going to be people. But what they think of you, what they feel about you is none of your problem, is none of your business. Focus on you, focus on your business, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Yasmina. I love that. And last but not least, Zane, if you'd like to close us out with advice to your 20-year-old self.
Thank you. I feel like we should have ended with that because that was really moving. That was so well said. I'll say short and sweet. Trust the process and trust your gut. I dedicated 5 years, doing concurrent education, and then I graduated and I moved cities, and I was like, I don't think I'm gonna go in a classroom. And everybody's like, what are you doing? That's what you should do. That's what you spend money on. That's what you spend time on. And if I didn't do that, I just felt in my gut. I was like, there's more I can do with this degree. I could just feel it. And everybody was like, go into supply work. If I hadn't trusted that little voice inside me, I wouldn't have found this great, role, and I wouldn't have been able to work with these exceptional youth. So there really is no single route, and just trust your gut. It typically takes you to good places. So.
Thank you so much. I am going to hand it over to Georgia to close us out, but I just want to extend my gratitude to the panelists and to the membership services team for allowing me to host this incredible career exploration. It has been a real pleasure, and I look forward to hearing more from these panelists and continuing to follow their incredible work.
Yeah, thank you, Aisha, and thank you so much for facilitating today. And thank you so much to Jennifer, Yasmina, Sydney, and Zane. Really incredible to hear from you today, and thank you so much for joining us. Definitely also just want to echo what someone messaged us in the chat, that it's really nice to hear that a lot of us kind of face the same thing entering the workforce. And even when we're in the workforce, I think it's like a constant battle of kind of feeling like we don't belong. I think that's exacerbated by being women with different racialized or marginalization or that we're facing. So it's really nice to hear firsthand from everyone here today about your experiences and your advice and your successes. We love hearing about successes of women in business and politics and nonprofit and private and all of the sectors. It's really, really great to hear. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And have a nice evening, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.